Students, I am Rupam Jha. Hope you all are fine, in good health and spirit, staying safe and taking all necessary precautions. For the past few months, we have been observing many environmental changes around us. We also experienced tremors on a regular basis recently in Delhi NCR. So I am going to explain why these tremors occur and other changes taking place inside our Earth's surface in the chapter Our Changing Earth. So to start with, first I will tell you what lithospheric plates are. Now the Earth's crust consists of several large and small plates which carry continents and the ocean floor. Remember in the first chapter you had learnt about lithospheres? Now the lithosphere, as I told you, is broken into a number of plates known as lithospheric plates. Now, it is very surprising to know that these plates move around very slowly, just a few millimeters each year. This is because of the movement of the molten magma inside the earth, which moves in a circular manner. Now, the movement of these plates causes changes on the surface of the earth. The earth movements are divided on the basis of the forces which cause them. Thus, there are two types of earth movements based on the forces acting on them: endogenic forces and exogenic forces. Endogenic forces are those forces which act in the interior of the earth, whereas exogenic forces are those that work on the surface of the earth. In this episode, I will discuss what endogenic forces are and what are the effects of endogenic forces. Now, the forces which act in the interior of the earth are called as endogenic forces. These forces sometimes produce sudden movements, and at other times they produce slow movements. So, there are two types of endogenic movements as well: sudden and slow. When we speak of sudden movement, earthquake, volcano, and landslide can be the example. When we talk of slow movement, mountain building is the example. Sudden movements like earthquakes and volcanoes cause mass destruction over the surface of the earth. So to come to volcano, what is a volcano? A volcano is a vent, which is an opening in the earth's crust through which molten material erupts suddenly. Now, what are earthquakes? When the lithospheric plates move, the surface of the earth vibrates. This vibration is because of the sudden release of energy. Now, these vibrations, they travel all around the earth. This is known as earthquake. Now, the place in the crust where the movement starts is called the focus, and the place on the surface above the focus is called the epicenter. So, for you to understand, the bottommost point where actually this vibration started, the lowest point in the earth's crust is the focus, and the just above that focus At the top in the surface is the epicenter. Now understand that when these vibrations take place, these vibrations travel outwards. You can just think of ripples when you throw a stone in the river or any perhaps in a tub full of water. You will see that ripples are formed, which are the smaller circle, then the larger, and then the larger ones. Now, similarly, these earthquake waves are also formed, and the damage is the most, or the greatest damage is usually closest to the epicenter, and the strength of the earthquake decreases away from the center. That means the areas which are away from the epicenter, there is lesser damage. Although earthquakes cannot be predicted, but some earthquake prediction methods have been adopted locally by the people, like studying animal behavior, especially fish in the ponds getting agitated or snakes come to the surface. However, although earthquakes cannot be predicted, but the impact can certainly be minimized if we are prepared beforehand. To be prepared, there are three most important things to be done. Number one must look for a safe spot so that whenever the need arises, one can take a shelter either under the table or desk or inside against an inside corner or wall. Similarly, second important thing is staying away from fireplaces, areas around chimneys, windows that shatter, including mirrors and picture frames. Third important thing, be prepared. Spread awareness amongst your friends and family members. An extremely important thing to be done. Do not panic and face any disaster confidently. Welcome to. In this episode, I will tell you about exogenic forces. These are forces that work on the surface of the earth. Now, the landscape is being continuously worn away by two processes, weathering and erosion. Weathering, as you all know, is the breaking up of rocks on the earth's surface, whereas erosion is wearing away of landscape by different agents like water, wind, and ice. The eroded material that is carried away and eventually gets deposited results in the formation of different landforms on the surface of the earth. So I will tell you about the work of a river, work of a sea cave, work of ice, and work of wind. To start with, let's see what are the different features that are formed by the work of a river. Now, the running water in the river erodes the landscape. It erodes the riverbed wherever or from whichever area it flows. So, whenever this river falls from a great height or steep angle, or it falls down a steep valley, it forms waterfall. Then further, the river, when it enters the plain area, it forms twists and turns. These twists and turns, that means large bends, are known as meanders. So the second feature or the second landform that is formed by the work of river is meander. Further, in due course of time, this meander, the loop cuts off from the main river and it forms an oxbow lake. Further, the river sometimes overflows the bank, and as it floods the entire area, this area is known as floodplain, where it deposits fertile silt and alluvium. Further, when the river is about to fall into the sea or just before entering the sea, by this time there is too much of sedimentation or too much sediments get deposited around that area, where the river breaks up into multiple channels or streams called distributaries, and thus this entire area is known as delta. We all know that India has the world's largest delta, that is the Sundarbans. Similarly, erosion and deposition also acts on sea waves. Now what happens in the sea? Sea waves, it gives rise to coastal landforms. The sea waves continuously strike against the rocks. Then the cracks develop in the rocks. Over the time, these cracks become larger and larger and create hollow structure. As a result, sea caves, cave-like structure is formed, and thus they are known as sea caves. Then similarly, sea arches are formed because further erosion of that rock or the structure results in sea arches and sea cliffs. Further, we see that this erosion and deposition also work on glaciers. What happens when the glaciers melt? They melt down, they get filled up with water, and they become beautiful lakes in the mountains. Now, in the due course, when the glacier melts and flows down, they carry big rocks, small rocks, sand, silt, and all these things gets deposited, forming glacial moraine. Then another type of erosional and depositional work is mushroom rock and sand dunes in the desert area. How are these mushroom rocks formed? What happens? Winds erode the lower section of the rock, but the upper section remains the same. So, there is a mushroom type of structure formed in the desert area. Further, when the wind blows, it lifts and transports sand from one place to another. When it stops blowing, the sand falls and gets deposited in low hill-like structures, which are known as sand dunes. So let's revise once again all the exogenic forces and the result of these exogenic forces on river, on sea caves, ice and wind. When these exogenic forces act on river, waterfall, meander, oxbow lake, delta, etc. are formed. When it works or acts on sea waves, then sea cave, sea arches, sea cliffs are formed. Similarly, glacial moraine, sand dunes and mushroom rocks are formed.